The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Morrison completed his final patrol. After 23 years of dedicated service to the royal family, today marked his last day as a royal guard. His weathered hands adjusted the red tunic one final time. Knowing he would never wear it again after sunset, James had seen 3 generations of royals during his career. He remembered Princess Diana's wedding, witnessed Prince William's first steps, stood guard during countless state visits. But nothing had prepared him for the events that would unfold on his farewell day. The castle buzzed with unusual activity that morning. Queen Camilla had requested additional security for a private ceremony in the East Wing. Staff members whispered among themselves about mysterious deliveries and closed-door meetings. James noticed several antique dealers entering through the private entrance, carrying leather cases and wearing serious expressions. As the Queen Consort's personal guard for the past 5 years, James knew her routines better than anyone. She always took her morning tea in the blue drawing room at precisely 9 o'clock. She preferred Earl Grey with 2 sugar cubes, and always read the morning papers in order of importance. Today, however, she seemed distracted and kept glancing toward the window that overlooked the castle's storage buildings. The previous evening, James had overheard a heated phone conversation between Queen Camilla and her private secretary. Words like inventory, missing items, and investigation drifted through the partially open door. When the Queen noticed James nearby, she quickly ended the call and smiled nervously. It was the first time in 5 years that James had seen genuine worry in her eyes. During lunch, Castle's head butler, Mr. Richardson, approached James with an unusual request. The Queen Consort needed someone trustworthy to oversee the transportation of several personal items from her private storage to the main castle. These items, Richardson explained, were extremely valuable and required the highest level of security. James accepted the assignment without hesitation, though he wondered why such a task couldn't wait until his replacement arrived. The storage facility sat in a converted stable building about half a mile from the main castle. James had passed it countless times during his patrols, but never had reason to enter. The building's stone walls were thick, and heavy iron doors secured each storage unit. Queen Camilla's space occupied the entire upper floor, accessible only by a narrow staircase and protected by multiple locks. As James waited for the Queen's arrival, he reflected on the strange atmosphere that had settled over the castle in recent weeks. Ever since Queen Elizabeth's passing the previous year, there had been ongoing discussions about the royal jewel collection. Several pieces that should have been catalogued were mysteriously absent from the official inventory. The media had begun asking uncomfortable questions about the whereabouts of certain historical items. Queen Camilla arrived at the storage facility precisely at 3 o'clock, accompanied by her lady-in-waiting and a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as an insurance assessor. She carried herself with usual royal dignity, but James noticed her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved the keys from her handbag. The assessor kept checking his watch and glancing around as if expecting someone to interrupt them. The Queen's storage unit resembled a small warehouse filled with furniture covered in white sheets, oil paintings stacked against the walls, and numerous trunks of various sizes. Everything appeared organized and well-maintained. Queen Camilla directed James toward a particular trunk sitting near the back corner, partially hidden behind an antique armoire. Unlike the other storage containers, this trunk appeared older and more ornate, brass fittings that had dulled with age. As James approached the trunk, he noticed it felt surprisingly heavy for its size. The leather exterior bore the faint impression of a royal coat of arms, though time had made the details difficult to distinguish. Queen Camilla handed him the key with steady hands, but her voice wavered slightly when she asked him to open it carefully. The insurance assessor moved closer. Pulling out a small camera and notepad, the lock clicked open with surprising ease, suggesting it had been opened recently despite its aged appearance. James lifted the heavy lid slowly, unsure what to expect. The interior was lined with deep purple velvet. Nestled within custom-fitted compartments lay an extraordinary collection of jewelry that made James catch his breath. Even with his limited knowledge of precious stones, he could tell these pieces were extraordinary. The centerpiece was a magnificent tiara, featuring diamonds that caught the afternoon light streaming through the small window. Beside it lay several necklaces with stones so large they seemed almost artificial, though James suspected they were anything but fake. Matching earrings, bracelets, and brooches filled the remaining spaces, each piece more stunning than the last. The assessor began photographing everything while making rapid notes. Queen Camilla watched James's reaction carefully. She explained that these were personal pieces that had belonged to the late Queen Elizabeth, items that had been temporarily moved to secure storage during the transition period following the Queen's death. The official cataloging process had been delayed due to various administrative complications, and now everything needed to be returned to the main royal collection for proper documentation. However, something about the explanation didn't sit quite right with James. In his years of service, he had learned to read people's expressions and body language. The Queen Consort seemed to be choosing her words very carefully, and the insurance assessor appeared more nervous than someone simply doing routine paperwork. James had also noticed that none of the pieces in the trunk matched any jewelry he remembered seeing the late Queen wear during public appearances, as they prepared to transport the trunk back to the castle. James overheard the assessor whisper something about matching the missing inventory list to Queen Camilla. She quickly shushed him and announced they should return immediately. The lady-in-waiting helped secure the trunk while James carried it to the waiting vehicle. His mind racing with questions he knew he couldn't ask, the drive back to Windsor Castle took only minutes. But it felt much longer to James. He found himself thinking about his oath of loyalty to the royal family and wondering what exactly he had stumbled upon during his final day of service. The trunk sat securely beside him, containing secrets that clearly went far deeper than a simple storage reorganization. As they approached the castle gates, James realized his last day as a royal guard was about to become far more memorable than he had ever imagined. Back at Windsor Castle, James helped carry the mysterious trunk into a private room on the second floor that he had never entered before. The space looked more like a bank vault than a royal chamber. With heavy curtains blocking the windows and additional security cameras mounted in each corner, Queen Camilla dismissed her lady-in-waiting and asked James to remain while she and the insurance assessor examined the contents more thoroughly. The assessor spread a white cloth across a mahogany table and began removing each piece of jewelry with cotton gloves. He photographed every item from multiple angles while recording detailed descriptions into a small recording device. James watched in fascination as the man identified each stone and estimated its value. The numbers he mentioned seemed impossibly high, reaching into millions of pounds for individual pieces. During this process, James noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Several of the jewelry pieces looked remarkably similar to items he remembered seeing in newspaper photographs from the late Queen's funeral and lying-in-state ceremonies. Specifically, there was a diamond and sapphire brooch that looked identical to one that had been prominently displayed on Queen Elizabeth's coffin as a final tribute from the nation. Queen Camilla noticed James's intense focus on the brooch and quickly moved it to a different section of the table. She began talking rapidly about how many pieces in the royal collection looked similar to each other, especially items created by the same jewelers over the decades. Her explanation sounded rehearsed, and James suspected she had been preparing answers to questions that might arise about these particular items. The insurance assessor completed his examination and packed away his equipment with obvious relief. He handed Queen Camilla a sealed envelope and mentioned that the documentation would be submitted to the appropriate authorities within 48 hours. Before leaving, he reminded her that any public disclosure of the inventory review would need to be carefully coordinated with the palace's media relations team. After the assessor departed, Queen Camilla turned to James with a serious expression. She explained that the royal jewelry collection had become a complicated matter following Queen Elizabeth's death. Many pieces had been moved to various secure locations during the transition period. Some items had been temporarily misplaced in the administrative confusion. The process of reuniting everything and updating the official records was taking much longer than anticipated. James listened respectfully, but his years of security training had taught him to notice inconsistencies in people's stories. Queen Camilla kept referring to temporary storage and administrative delays, but the condition of the trunk and the secrecy surrounding. Today's activities suggested something more significant was happening. He also couldn't forget the worried phone conversation he had overheard the previous evening. As they prepared to move the trunk to its next destination within the castle, James's radio crackled with an urgent message. His replacement guard reported that several members of the press had gathered outside the main gates, asking questions about rumors of missing royal jewels. Someone had apparently tipped them off about an investigation into the royal collection's inventory discrepancies. Queen Camilla's face went pale. When she heard this news, she immediately called her private secretary and spoke in hushed, urgent tones about implementing damage control measures. James heard fragments of the conversation, including references to denying everything and no comment until further notice. The situation was clearly more serious than she had initially indicated. Within an hour, additional security personnel arrived at the castle. James recognized several faces from the Royal Protection Squad, the elite team responsible for investigating threats to the royal family. Their presence suggested that whatever was happening with the jewelry collection had attracted the attention of the highest levels of royal security. James began to wonder if he had unknowingly become involved in something that could have serious legal implications. That evening, as James prepared for his official farewell ceremony, he received an unexpected visit from Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell from the Metropolitan Police's Specialized Royal Crimes Unit. She introduced herself politely, but made it clear that her visit was official business. The detective asked James to recount everything he had observed during his final day, particularly regarding his activities at the storage facility. James found himself in an impossible position. His loyalty to the royal family had been absolute for over 2 decades. But he also had a duty to cooperate with law enforcement. He carefully described the events of the day, while trying not to speculate about Queen Camilla's motives or the true nature of the jewelry collection. Detective Mitchell took detailed notes and asked several pointed questions about the trunk's contents and the insurance assessor's behavior. The detective revealed that the Metropolitan Police had been conducting a discreet investigation into several missing pieces from the royal jewelry collection for the past 3 months. The investigation had been kept secret to avoid embarrassing the royal family, but recent developments had made it necessary to expand their inquiries. She couldn't provide specific details, but she indicated that James's observations might be crucial to understanding what had happened to the missing items. After Detective Mitchell left, James sat alone in his quarters, trying to process the day's events. His farewell ceremony had been postponed indefinitely, and he had been asked to remain available for additional questions. The career that was supposed to end with honor and celebration now seemed to be concluding with uncertainty and potential scandal. Late that night, James received a phone call from Queen Camilla's private secretary. The message was brief but clear. James was to report to the private office first thing in the morning for an important meeting with the Queen Consort. The secretary emphasized that discretion was absolutely essential and that James should not discuss the day's events with anyone, including other members of the royal staff. As James tried to sleep, he couldn't stop thinking about the jewelry in the trunk and the reactions of everyone who had seen it. The insurance assessor's nervousness, Queen Camilla's careful explanations, and the sudden arrival of the police detective all suggested that something significant was wrong. He had spent his entire adult life protecting the royal family, but now he wondered if he might have inadvertently uncovered evidence of something that could seriously damage their reputation. The following morning would bring even more revelations, and James sensed that his role in this unfolding drama was far from over. His final day as a royal guard had become the beginning of something much larger and more complex than he could have imagined. The trunk's contents had opened questions that would need answers. James suspected that he might be the only person who could provide them. James arrived at Queen Camilla's private office early the next morning, still wearing his royal guard uniform despite officially completing his service. The ornate room felt different somehow, charged with tension that hadn't existed during his previous visits. Queen Camilla sat behind her desk, flanked by 2 men James didn't recognize. One appeared to be a lawyer based on his formal attire and briefcase, While the other had the unmistakable bearing of a senior intelligence officer, the Queen Consort's usual warm demeanor had been replaced by something much more businesslike and guarded. She thanked James for his years of loyal service before explaining that the situation with the jewelry collection had become more complicated than initially anticipated. Several pieces that should have been in the official royal inventory were missing, and questions were being raised about their whereabouts and the circumstances of their disappearance. The lawyer, who introduced himself as Sir Robert Thornton, explained that James's observations from the previous day had become relevant to an ongoing investigation. However, he emphasized that James was not suspected of any wrongdoing. Instead, his testimony might help clarify the timeline of events and establish the proper chain of custody for certain valuable items. Sir Robert's carefully chosen words suggested that someone was definitely suspected of wrongdoing, even if it wasn't James, the intelligence officer, who declined to give his name but showed credentials identifying him as MI5. Asked James to describe everything he remembered about the trunk's contents in much greater detail. He was particularly interested in James's impressions of the insurance assessor and any conversations James might have overheard. The officer's questions were precise and methodical, suggesting he already knew many of the answers and was testing James's honesty. During the questioning, James learned that the insurance assessor from the previous day had disappeared overnight. His hotel room was empty. His rental car had been abandoned at Heathrow Airport, and there was no record of him boarding any flights under the name he had provided. Furthermore, the insurance company he claimed to represent had no employee matching his description. The man was apparently an imposter, though his purpose remained unclear. Queen Camilla seemed genuinely shocked by this revelation. She insisted that the man had been recommended by a trusted associate and had provided proper credentials when they first met. However, the MIY officer indicated that they were investigating how extensively the Queen Consort had been deceived and whether she might have inadvertently assisted in the theft or concealment of royal property. The conversation took an even more serious turn when Sir Robert revealed that several pieces from the trunk matched items reported missing from Queen Elizabeth's private collection immediately following her death. These weren't ceremonial pieces that belonged to the Crown Estates, but personal jewelry that the late Queen had intended to pass to specific family members according to her will. The disappearance of these items had initially been attributed to administrative confusion during the transition period. James found himself caught between conflicting loyalties as the questioning continued. He genuinely believed that Queen Camilla had been trying to do the right thing by securing the jewelry and ensuring it was properly catalogued. However, the circumstances surrounding the trunk's discovery and the fake insurance assessor suggested that someone had been manipulating events for their own purposes. James couldn't shake the feeling that Queen Camilla might be as much a victim as anyone else. The MI5 officer asked James to examine photographs of several jewelry pieces that had been reported missing from various royal collections over the past 18 months. To James's surprise, he recognized at least 6 items that had been in the trunk the previous day. The officer's expression grew more serious as James confirmed these identifications, and he made several notes in a secured tablet. During a brief recess, Queen Camilla asked to speak with James privately. She appeared genuinely distressed and confused by the morning's revelations. She explained that she had been contacted several months ago by someone claiming to represent a specialized insurance company that handled high-value royal artifacts. This person had offered to help organize and secure various pieces during the inventory process following Queen Elizabeth's death. The Queen Consort revealed that she had been struggling with the overwhelming responsibility of managing the late Queen's personal effects. Many items had been stored in various locations throughout the royal residences, and the task of cataloging everything while dealing with her grief had seemed impossible. When the insurance assessor offered his services, she had been grateful for professional assistance. However, Queen Camilla now realized that she might have been deliberately targeted by someone who knew about the inventory challenges and saw an opportunity to exploit the situation. The fake assessor had gained her trust over several months, gradually convincing her to move various pieces to secure storage While the official documentation was being prepared, she had believed she was protecting the royal heritage, but instead, she might have been helping to conceal stolen property. When the official questioning resumed, James was asked to provide a detailed written statement about everything he had observed and heard during his final day of service. The MI5 officer emphasized that James's testimony would be crucial in determining whether Queen Camilla had been an unwitting victim of an elaborate fraud or had been knowingly involved in concealing missing royal jewelry. Sir Robert explained that the legal situation was extremely delicate. The missing jewelry was worth millions of pounds and had significant historical importance. If the items had indeed been stolen, the theft represented one of the most serious crimes against the royal family in modern history. However, if Queen Camilla had been deceived by professional criminals, she would need protection from both legal consequences and potential embarrassment, as the meeting concluded. James was sworn to absolute secrecy about everything he had learned. He was also informed that he might be called to testify in future legal proceedings, depending on how the investigation developed. The MI5 officer provided James with a secure contact number and emphasized that he should report any attempts by unknown individuals to contact him about the jewelry or his involvement in its discovery. James left the private office feeling more confused than ever. His simple act of helping to transport a trunk had uncovered what appeared to be a sophisticated criminal conspiracy targeting the royal family. He couldn't help but wonder how many other people might be involved and whether the fake insurance assessor had been working alone or as part of a larger organization. That afternoon, James received a call from Detective Chief Inspector Mitchell requesting another meeting. She had additional questions based on new information that had come to light during the ongoing investigation. James agreed to meet her at a secure location away from the castle, sensing that his involvement in this case was far from over. As he prepared for this next meeting, James reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 2 days. His peaceful retirement had been replaced by a complex criminal investigation that could have far-reaching consequences for the royal family and the nation. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell met James at a quiet cafe in Windsor town. Far from the prying eyes and ears that surrounded the castle, she arrived with a thick file folder and a tablet computer, suggesting that the investigation had expanded significantly since their last conversation. Her serious expression immediately told James that the situation had become even more complicated. The detective began by revealing that the fake insurance assessor wasn't working alone. Surveillance footage from various locations around Windsor had captured him meeting with at least 3 other individuals over the past 2 months. These meetings had taken place in public spaces like parks and restaurants, suggesting a level of sophistication and caution that indicated professional criminal activity rather than opportunistic theft. More disturbing still, the investigation had uncovered evidence that similar approaches had been made to staff members at other royal residences. A housekeeper at Balmoral Castle had reported being contacted by someone claiming to offer inventory assistance for Queen Elizabeth's Scottish jewelry collection. A curator at the Palace of Holyrood House had received similar overtures. In each case, the criminals had demonstrated detailed knowledge of royal procedures and security protocols. Detective Mitchell showed James photographs taken from security cameras at various locations. The fake insurance assessor appeared in several images, but he had altered his appearance subtly in each encounter, sometimes wearing glasses, occasionally sporting a beard, always dressed appropriately for his supposed professional role. The man was clearly experienced in deception and surveillance evasion. The detective's most shocking revelation was that the criminal organization appeared to have inside information about royal family, activities, and schedules. They had known about Queen Camilla's storage arrangements, the timing of inventory procedures, and even specific details about which pieces were temporarily unsecured during the transition period. This suggested that someone with legitimate access to royal household information was either involved in the conspiracy or had been compromised. James felt his stomach sink as he realized the implications. During his 23 years of service, he had witnessed the absolute trust that existed within the royal household. Staff members, security personnel, and family members all operated with the understanding that everyone around them was completely loyal and trustworthy. The possibility that this trust had been betrayed felt like a personal violation. Detective Mitchell asked James about any unusual behavior he had observed among castle staff over the past 6 months. Had anyone shown unexpected interest in the jewelry collection? Had anyone asked questions about security procedures or inventory processes? Were there any new employees or temporary workers who had gained access to sensitive areas? As James thought carefully about these questions, several incidents began to take on new significance. He remembered a conversation with a new cleaning supervisor who had asked detailed questions about which rooms contained valuable artifacts. At the time, James had assumed the man was simply trying to ensure proper security protocols were followed. Now he wondered if the questions had a more sinister purpose. There had also been a temporary electrician who had worked on security systems throughout the castle during the summer months. The man had been properly vetted and came with excellent references. But James recalled that he had seemed particularly interested in the storage areas, and had asked about access procedures for various buildings on the grounds. The electrician had completed his work and disappeared, but James now wondered if his primary purpose had been surveillance. Rather than electrical repairs, Detective Mitchell took detailed notes about these individuals and promised to investigate their backgrounds more thoroughly. She explained that the criminal organization had likely spent months or even years identifying vulnerabilities in royal security and recruiting or deceiving people who could provide access or information. The jewelry theft appeared to be just one part of a larger, more ambitious criminal enterprise. The conversation took an even more serious turn when Detective Mitchell revealed that similar criminal organizations had been identified. Targeting wealthy families and cultural institutions across Europe, the methods were always the same: extensive research, patient cultivation of inside contacts, and exploitation of transitional periods when security might be temporarily reduced. The criminals were sophisticated, well-funded, and apparently part of an international network. James learned that Interpol had been tracking this organization for over 2 years, but their operations were so carefully planned and executed that evidence had been difficult to gather. The Windsor Castle incident represented the first time anyone had been caught in the act, making James's testimony potentially crucial to exposing the entire network. However, this also meant that James might be at risk if the criminals realized he could identify them. Detective Mitchell provided James with a secure communication device and detailed security protocols for his personal protection. She emphasized that he should vary his daily routines, report any suspicious activity immediately, and avoid discussing the case with anyone except authorized law enforcement personnel. The detective's precautions made it clear that the criminals had demonstrated they were willing to go to considerable lengths to protect their operations as their meeting continued. James learned more about the scope of the missing jewelry. The items from Queen Camilla's trunk represented only a fraction of the pieces that had disappeared from royal collections over the past 18 months. The total value of missing artifacts was estimated at over £50 million, making this one of the largest art and jewelry theft cases in British history. The detective explained that the criminals' strategy had been brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than attempting a dramatic heist that would immediately trigger massive security responses, they had exploited the natural chaos and administrative challenges that followed Queen Elizabeth's death. During the months when inventories were being updated and items were being moved between locations, the criminals had systematically removed pieces while making it appear that the absences were due to administrative delays. Queen Camilla's situation was particularly tragic because she had genuinely been trying to organize and protect the royal heritage. The criminals had exploited her grief and overwhelming sense of responsibility, convincing her that their assistance was both necessary and legitimate. Her cooperation had been obtained through deception rather than coercion, but the result had been the same. Detective Mitchell assured James that Queen Camilla was now considered a victim rather than a suspect, though the investigation would need to continue until all the facts were established. The fake insurance assessor's sudden disappearance had actually helped to confirm that the queen consort had been deceived rather than complicit in any criminal activity. As their meeting concluded, James was asked to remain available for additional questioning as the investigation expanded. He was also warned that media attention might intensify as more details about the missing jewelry became public knowledge. The detective provided him with contact information for a liaison officer, who would coordinate with James if press inquiries became overwhelming. Walking back toward his car, James realized that his quiet retirement had been permanently altered by the events of the past few days. He was now a key witness in an international criminal investigation that could have profound implications for the royal family and the security of cultural treasures throughout Europe. The simple act of opening a trunk had revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond Windsor Castle's walls. 3 weeks after the discovery of the trunk, James found himself sitting in a secure conference room at New Scotland Yard, surrounded by representatives from multiple law enforcement agencies. The investigation had expanded dramatically, with Interpol, the FBI, and European police forces all contributing information about the international criminal network. What had begun as a simple inventory discrepancy had revealed one of the most sophisticated art theft operations in modern history. Detective Chief Inspector Mitchell briefed the assembled team on the latest developments. The fake insurance assessor had been identified as Marcus Kowalski, a Polish national with previous convictions for art fraud in 3 countries. However, Kowalski was merely a mid-level operative in an organization that specialized in targeting cultural institutions and wealthy families during periods of transition or vulnerability. The criminal network's leader was believed to be a woman known only as the curator, who had never been photographed or directly observed by law enforcement. She apparently possessed extensive knowledge of art history, museum procedures, and security systems. Her organization had been linked to thefts from private collections in Switzerland, art museums in Italy, and historic estates in France. The royal family had simply been their most ambitious target to date. James listened in fascination as investigators from different countries shared information about similar cases. In each instance, the criminals had spent months or years researching their targets, identifying vulnerable periods, and cultivating relationships with people who had legitimate access to valuable items. Their patience and attention to detail had allowed them to operate undetected. For over 5 years, the investigation had also revealed disturbing information about the extent of the security breach at Windsor Castle. The temporary electrician James had mentioned was indeed connected to the criminal organization. His real name was Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative who had specialized in technical surveillance. During his weeks at the castle, he had installed hidden cameras and listening devices that provided the criminals with real-time information about royal family activities and security procedures. Even more troubling was the discovery that the organization had compromised communications within the royal household. Several staff members had unknowingly installed malicious software on their personal devices after clicking on seemingly innocent links in emails or social media messages. This had given the criminals access to private conversations, scheduling information, and security protocols. Queen Camilla's private secretary had been one of the unwitting victims of this electronic surveillance. Her communications about the inventory challenges and storage arrangements had been monitored by the criminals for months, allowing them to time their approach perfectly. They had known exactly when the queen consort would be most vulnerable to their offer of assistance. The scope of the theft was still being determined, but investigators had identified over 200 missing pieces from various royal collections. Many items had already been sold to private collectors in Asia and the Middle East, where they would be extremely difficult to recover. However, the trunk James had discovered contained many of the most valuable and historically significant pieces, suggesting that the criminals had been saving their best acquisitions for a major sale. James testified about his observations during a formal hearing that was recorded and would be used in prosecution proceedings across multiple jurisdictions. His detailed recollections of the trunk's contents, Queen Camilla's behavior, and the fake insurance assessor's nervous demeanor provided crucial evidence about the criminals' methods and the timeline of their activities. During his testimony, James also revealed additional details he had remembered since his initial interviews. The fake insurance assessor had worn expensive clothing that didn't quite fit properly, suggesting he was using someone else's wardrobe. He had also carried a briefcase with airline baggage tags that indicated recent travel to Switzerland and Singapore, both countries known for their discreet art markets. The investigation team was particularly interested in James's observation that several pieces in the trunk had seemed recently cleaned and polished. This suggested that the criminals had been preparing the jewelry for sale, possibly to specific buyers who had already expressed interest. Investigators were now working with art crime specialists to identify potential purchasers and recover as many pieces as possible as the hearing concluded. James learned that his role in exposing the criminal network had prevented an even larger theft. Intelligence gathered from the surveillance equipment revealed that the organization had been planning to target several other European royal families and had already begun preliminary research on the Vatican's art collection. James's accidental discovery of the trunk had disrupted these plans and potentially saved cultural treasures worth hundreds of millions of pounds. The personal cost of his involvement was becoming clear as well. James had received several threatening phone calls from unknown numbers. His home address had apparently been compromised. Detective Mitchell arranged for him to be relocated to a safe house while the investigation continued and the criminals were apprehended. His peaceful retirement had been replaced by witness protection protocols. In security concerns, Queen Camilla had requested a private meeting with James to personally thank him for his discretion and professionalism throughout the ordeal. During their conversation, she expressed genuine remorse for having been deceived by the criminals and emphasized her gratitude that James had been present during such a crucial moment. She also assured him that the royal family would provide any assistance he needed. During the ongoing legal proceedings, the Queen Consort revealed that the experience had taught her valuable lessons about the challenges of protecting cultural heritage in the modern world. She had established new security protocols for handling royal artifacts and had commissioned a comprehensive review of all storage and inventory procedures. The goal was to ensure that such a sophisticated deception could never succeed again. Media attention surrounding the case was carefully managed to protect both the investigation and the royal family's reputation. Official statements acknowledged that a criminal conspiracy had been discovered and that valuable items had been recovered, but specific details were withheld to avoid compromising ongoing operations in other countries. James's identity as a key witness remained confidential for his own protection. As autumn arrived, James reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that morning when he opened Queen Camilla's trunk. His final day as a royal guard had become the beginning of an international adventure that had tested his loyalty, courage, and integrity. The simple act of following orders had accidentally exposed one of the most ambitious criminal conspiracies in recent history. The investigation was far from over, and James knew he would likely be involved in legal proceedings for months or even years to come. However, he took pride in knowing that his observations and testimony had helped protect irreplaceable cultural treasures and had prevented the royal family from suffering an even more devastating loss. 6 months after opening the trunk that changed his life forever, James Morrison stood in the witness box at the Old Bailey, facing the most important testimony of his career. The courtroom was packed with international law enforcement officials, legal representatives, and carefully screened media personnel covering what had become known as the Royal Heritage Case. After months of investigation across multiple continents, the criminal network's leadership had finally been captured, brought to trial. The woman known as the curator sat in the defendant's dock, revealed at last to be Dr. Alina Marchetti, a former art history professor who had used her academic credentials to gain access to museums and private collections around the world. Her sophisticated knowledge of art and antiquities had made her criminal organization exceptionally effective at identifying and stealing the most valuable pieces while avoiding detection. James's testimony proved to be the crucial link that connected Dr. Marchetti to the Windsor Castle theft. His detailed observations of the fake insurance assessor combined with surveillance footage and electronic evidence, established a clear chain of criminal activity that stretched from London to Geneva to Hong Kong. The jury listened intently as James described finding the trunk and the subsequent discoveries that had unraveled the entire conspiracy. During cross-examination, Dr. Marchetti's defense attorney attempted to portray the case as a series of administrative errors rather than deliberate theft. However, James's steady, factual testimony about Queen Camilla's obvious distress and the fake assessor's nervous behavior helped establish that criminal intent had been present throughout the operation. His 23 years of experience observing human behavior under pressure gave his observations particular credibility. The prosecution revealed that Dr. Marchetti's organization had stolen over 400 pieces of art and jewelry from institutions and private collections across Europe over a period of 7 years. The total value exceeded £200 million, making it one of the largest art theft cases in legal history. The royal family's losses represented only about 15% of the organization's total criminal activity. James learned during the trial that his accidental involvement had prevented an even more devastating crime. Electronic evidence recovered from the surveillance equipment showed that Dr. Marchetti had been planning to steal the crown jewels themselves during the next major state ceremony. Her organization had spent 2 years studying the security procedures surrounding the crown jewels and had identified a brief window of vulnerability during transportation between the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey. The fake insurance assessor, Marcus Kowalski, had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the intricate details of how Dr. Marchetti recruited operatives and planned each theft. With military precision, Kowalski explained that he had been chosen for the Windsor Castle operation specifically because of his ability to mimic professional credentials and gain the trust of wealthy targets. The most shocking revelation came when Kowalski testified about Dr. Marchetti's ultimate plan. The stolen royal jewelry was intended to fund a much larger criminal enterprise involving the systematic looting of archaeological sites across the Middle East and Africa. The profits from selling Queen Elizabeth's personal collection would have financed equipment and personnel for illegal excavations that could have destroyed irreplaceable historical sites. James felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that his simple act of opening a trunk had prevented not just the theft of British cultural treasures, but it also protected archaeological heritage around the world. The ripple effects of that moment at the storage facility had extended far beyond anything he could have imagined during his final day as a royal guard. The trial also revealed the extent to which Queen Camilla had been manipulated by the criminal organization. Dr. Marchetti had specifically targeted the Queen consort because she knew that the transition period following Queen Elizabeth's death would create opportunities for confusion and misdirection. The criminals had exploited the Queen's grief and sense of overwhelming responsibility to gain access to the most valuable pieces in the royal collection. Expert witnesses testified about the historical significance of the recovered jewelry. Several pieces dated back to the Victorian era and had been worn by multiple generations of British monarchs during important state occasions. One tiara had been a wedding gift from Queen Victoria to her daughter and had been photographed at royal ceremonies for over a century. The cultural and historical value of these pieces extended far beyond their monetary worth. The international scope of the investigation had led to arrests in 8 countries and the recovery of stolen artwork worth over £150 million. Museums in Italy, France, and Germany had recovered pieces that had been missing for years, and several private collectors had unknowingly purchased stolen items that were now being returned to their rightful owners. As the trial progressed, James found himself developing an unexpected friendship with Detective Chief Inspector Mitchell. Their shared experience of uncovering the conspiracy had created a bond based on mutual respect and professional admiration. The detective had praised James's observational skills and suggested that he consider working as a consultant? For art crime investigations after his retirement, the security implications of the case led to significant changes in how cultural institutions protected their collections. The royal family implemented new protocols for inventory management and staff vetting, while museums across Europe upgraded their security systems and communication procedures. James's experience had highlighted vulnerabilities that had existed for decades without being recognized. Queen Camilla attended the final day of the trial to hear the verdict and sentencing. She sat in the public gallery, maintaining her royal composure while listening to the details of how she had been deceived and manipulated. When Dr. Marchetti was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the Queen Consort's relief was visible to everyone in the courtroom. After the trial concluded, James was invited to a private ceremony at Windsor Castle, where he was formally thanked by the royal family for his role in protecting the nation's cultural heritage. King Charles presented him with a special commendation, recognizing his service and dedication. The ceremony was kept small and private, but it represented the highest honor James could have received for his actions. The recovered jewelry was restored to its proper place in the royal collection, with enhanced security measures, ensuring it would remain protected for future generations. Several pieces were put on public display for the first time in decades, allowing the British people to see treasures that had nearly been lost forever. James attended the exhibition opening and felt immense pride knowing that his vigilance had helped preserve these irreplaceable artifacts. As he settled into his delayed retirement, James reflected on the extraordinary conclusion to his career as a royal guard. What should have been a routine final day had instead become a defining moment that helped expose international criminals and protect cultural treasures. He had proven that sometimes the most significant discoveries happen when ordinary people do their duty with extraordinary attention to detail. The case became a landmark in international art crime prosecution and led to new cooperation agreements between law enforcement agencies around the world. James's testimony was studied as an example of how careful observation and honest art could unravel even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Looking back on the entire experience, James realized that opening Queen Camilla's trunk had been more than just following orders. It had been a moment when fate, preparation, and duty had combined to protect something much larger than himself. His final act as a royal guard had ensured that future generations would be able to appreciate the same cultural treasures that had been entrusted to his protection for over 2 decades.